Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about the Netflix movie Klaus. I just watched it today, and so I just decided I'd make a video, just talking about it, considering that, Christmas is like right around the corner. So obviously, if you're coming across this and you've never seen the movie Klaus and you're wondering, should you see the movie Klaus, I highly recommend you do. I think in general, given my spoiler-free thoughts, I thought it was a great movie. It's this beautifully animated movie. You have Jason Schwartzman, J.K. Simmons, and Rashida Jones, just to name a few, giving their voices to characters in it. It's a really neat Christmas story. It's about a dude named Jesper who basically his dad owns like a post office company, and obviously Jesper's kind of a spoiled kid who's kind of it's like, oh, his dad kind of gave him put him through postal training just to kind of make him not the spoiled person that he is, but it didn't work, so he sends him to I'm blanking on the place's name, Smearensburg. I am just going to keep forgetting that every time. I do apologize, but basically his dad kind of ships him off there kind of as punishment, but more so than anything he hopes it's a situation that will make his son grow up and be a more responsible person. So it's kind of like a tough love type of situation. He's basically giving his son hey, you have an entire year to basically mail 6,000 postcards or letters. If you don't do that in that time frame, I'm cutting you off. So he's sent here, and it's a very rundown town. The town is in feuds. There's the Ellenbogs and the Crumbs, these two families that are kind of feuding between each other, and that's that makes up the entirety of the town, as these two families. So it's a very it started off as a means of, man, I need to get out of this town, and eventually turns into kind of a heartwarming story. It's a very interesting take on the Santa Claus mythology. Kind of understanding. I don't want to get into too many ins and outs of it, but it's a very sweet story, a very very hopeful story in many different regards. So it's just a great animated film if you haven't seen it. It's only an hour and a half, so it's great for the family and kids, I guess. I feel weird saying that. I mean, even if you don't have kids and you're just like, oh, I want something a little heartwarming and earnest, it's this is a great movie, but it's, especially if you want to, got the family gathered around, it's kind of my take on it. So, that's just kind of general non-spoiler thoughts on it. And, now I'm going to be getting into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Klaus, and you don't want it spoiled for you, do not continue watching, because like I said, I'm going to get into some spoilers. So this movie also has some interesting recurring bits. One of them being it comes up twice in the movie, is when the ladies are carrying, well, there's at least one lady, because when Jesper gets there, when he gets to town, he sees these two people carrying this body, because you see someone's shoe drop, and then as they're one lady goes shh and closes the door behind her. So I'm like, what is that about? We never get that explained, because it happens twice, because you see those same people carrying another body. So it's are you carrying the same body? Is it a different body? We got no explanation for it. It's just something in the background. And my other favorite bit is a recurring thing about the kids who just stare blankly, and then they're building a snowman, but they're all stabbing it with carrots. And there's that one particular girl, as the camera's panning away, she's slowly stabbing the carrot into the snowman. And later on, Jesper sees her in the battle, when everybody's feuding, she's looking at him, and then she's going into the dust of the battle, and she's got the carrot like a knife. And then we see her later on, but they're putting it on a proper snowman rather than killing him. She's actually giving him a nose. So I'm I love those just being little recurring bits. But I talked about it beforehand with the non-spoiler. I thought was kind of interesting was how this is an interesting take on the Santa Claus mythos, because it's basically everything that Santa Claus is known for, eating cookies and milk and getting in without you noticing it, and leaving it in your stockings and stuff like that. It's all that was Jesper. Those were situations that Jesper was kind of forced into. It's this person has a whole bunch of dogs, let me not sneak in here, let me just put the stuff in stockings. So it's there's explanations for it. So his roundabout way of doing things and just being himself ended up creating this mythos about Klaus, Klaus, rather, in this particular case. So I thought that was so interesting, and how I think a very neat way to go about, you know, I mean, that's how mythology is passed around, especially because these are kids. So they're like, oh my God, yeah, this and that, you know. And eventually it's interesting too, as like you're seeing the Santa Claus mythos kind of, like I said, get built up over the whole thing about like, oh yeah, if you're naughty, you get coal, because it's like he remembers delivering something to a kid who called him a loser, so he gave the kid a piece of coal. So like, you know, and it's so interesting because it's not even Klaus who did all this, it was Jesper, but it was, you know, a collaborative effort, both of them kind of working together. It's just, it's nice that it's like the circumstances created this mythology. So I thought that was kind of neat. But like I said, it's also befitting because these are kids sharing these stories with each other, you know, because that's how this whole thing starts, is because it's like, oh yeah, my cousin got a toy, I want a toy. It's like, well, write a letter. We don't know how to, some of us don't know how to write. Well, lucky for you, Alva is a teacher, but obviously she's like cutting up fish. She, like, her stores, she came there initially as a teacher, but to find out like, oh, like I'm actually, you know, cutting fish and stuff like that, because I've been in this town for 5 years and I've been slowly saving up money to get the hell out of here. And I thought that was so interesting. I mean, to be fair, it fits the town, you know, with like, obviously like the town just being so run down, like there is kind of like a missing hope in so many different regards. And it is interesting that, you know, someone like Jesper, who had came here, obviously to be, who obviously, you know, trying to create this wonderful situation out of like a selfish need, you know, ended up, you know, changing the place for the better, like in many different regards, because obviously there was the feuding families, which, like, you know, I think it's actually interesting. They never really explained how that went about or why the families are feuding. We just know that it goes back so far that eventually, like, one of the explanations was showing like a stone slab or whatever, like almost like it was like cut off like a cave wall or something, and it showed like cave paintings of like them fighting. So it's like it go kind of implying it goes that far back, but they never explained what happened. And I guess that's kind of the point. Like, it's so long ago we don't remember, but it's just so ingrained in our history that it's tradition. So we just keep it going. Why? Because that's tradition. Like, I thought that was such an interesting thing, you know, about that. And obviously even Klaus having his own, you know, kind of lack of, you know, hope, because obviously you learned the backstory about, you know, him losing his wife, what was her name, Lydia, and them wanting to have children. That's why he had so many toys, because he kept making more and more, you know, hopeful that they would have children someday, because they wanted to have a lot, but it never came about. And when his wife passed away, he stopped making, you know, toys, but he would keep building birdhouses, because, like, you know, it was his way of kind of keeping her alive, but, you know, making birdhouses because she loved the birds. And I thought it was so interesting, because I was wondering, and I like how they eventually explained this. They don't really explain it, but every time he sees the wind kind of, you know, blow him in the right direction, like obviously the letter from that first kid that Jesper was like, hey, you want your drawing back? Well, I'm gonna mail it to you. Oh, well, you know, so obviously Klaus finds that and gives away the first gift, and obviously that, you know, gets everything rolling. And it's so interesting that, like, you know, his tragedy is actually kind of what eventually pushed him further and further, especially with, like, you know, Jesper delivering all those letters of like, oh, all these kids want toys, like, you know, and they're writing to you. So I think because of his own, like, hey, never having kids of his own, and he almost felt like, hey, like his wife was in the wind, you know, pushing him along, being like, this is the right direction to go. So like I said, they never really go into it, but you can clearly tell, like, that's kind of like the messaging it was, you know, implying. And that he felt like this is his wife's will, and it's like also for the kids that they were never able to have. He wants to be able to bring some happiness, because they were never able to have kids of their own. But if it's like these toys he built for the kids he wanted him and his wife to have, if he can bring that happiness to other kids, because especially Jesper tries to lean into it. I'm like, oh yeah, like the kids, oh, they're so sad, like some of their toys are so run down and broken. And it's like, I forgot he was talking about someone, he's like, oh, so-and-so, ugly so-and-so, you know. It was like, oh, like obviously Jesper's, you know, very mean. But like I said, I like that it is a situation that, and it's a beautiful message in a movie of just like how, you know, and that's the whole point, like basically one good deed can, a moment of like one act of goodwill, I think it's, I'm butchering it, one act of goodwill sparks another, essentially. And we see that with the kids, like as the kids, you know, learn to be good and better, like, because obviously they're just kind of repeating the adults' behavior. It's like, oh, we're at war with these other people, oh, because the adults are. And obviously you had those two kid from the Ellenbow side of things and then the Crumb side of things, who are playing together at first, but then they're told like, no, 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 why would you do that? Oh my God, I'm so sorry for my son. I don't know what's wrong with the kid, because it's like asking all these questions, you know, and that's the whole reason, like you're asking questions about something that shouldn't be asked about. Like this feud is a thing for a reason, you know, and I just, but obviously it's like I was saying, like the kids are just replicating what the adults are kind of doing, and it's neat that it kind of works in reverse, where it's like the kids being good and kind of helping around town kind of gets rid of a lot of that spite, and so you have a lot of adults on both sides. You know, it's like, oh, I have a whole bunch of jam, so I give it to you. You make me a cake, but then it becomes this back and forth, and it becomes a lot more neighborly. A lot of the fences get torn down. A lot of that animosity between a lot of the characters disappears, and you know, and obviously that leads to Mr. Ellenbow and Miss Crumb being like, what's going on here? Like that hatred, like they just keep fueling it. Like once again, there's no reason behind it, but it's like it's tradition, and it's the way things have always been. And that, I think that could be, you know, a commentary in its own right. Just like, you know, some people refusing to change and letting go of the past and moving on, because for them it's like they've held on to the past for generations, so to let that go. So that's why Jesper as well as Klaus are seen as enemies. There's even the whole Sami situation, you know, with Margot, and I thought that was like this adorable thing, especially because when Jester, you know, at first he's ignored her most of them, he's like, all right, fine, and even that kind of leads to this beautiful situation, because it's like he's going to Alva to be like, yeah, can you help me out with this? Try to understand her, because at first she was just someone to vent to, and so for things to kind of eventually turn to what they do, she writes a letter to Klaus, and obviously they send her a gift, and it's like a little sled, you know, and even Jesper being like, oh yeah, I was worried it was too small, but then I found out like, oh no, it actually ended up being just right. And Klaus is like, yeah, that smile right there, that's, I remember my first, he's like, I'm not smiling, what are you talking about, you know? So I thought that was just kind of a beautiful aspect to the whole thing. And obviously, you know, like every, you know, hero kind of has their fall, and because obviously like he was still like, you know, he started feeling guilty, because at first he was starting to enjoy himself, and it did start feeling good, and it became less and less about, oh, these letters I've got to deliver like the 6,000. But obviously Miss Crumb and Mr. Ellenbow like kind of obviously manipulate the situation, because they're like, if we can get you out of here and stop all these toys going about, the kids will go back to the way they were, then the grown-ups will eventually go back to the way they were, and we can go back to the way we were, you know, bickering back and forth in the whole situation, you know? So, but yeah, the point I was making is that he started, you know, feeling guilty, because he's like, I can't stay here because can I really be just content with just being here? But then like Alva's showing him around, like, look at what you were able to do in this town. Like, you don't realize what kind of effect you had, because even on her, because obviously the whole thing was about saving up money, you know, so she could get out, but eventually she starts spending more and more of her savings to, you know, clean the place up and turn it actually into a school. And, you know, he kind of gave hope, not just to Klaus, but to so many people there, like, you know, and even Alva herself, you know, so I thought that was just kind of a beautiful aspect. Like I said, it is just, like I said, that whole thing of like, you know, you started off with selfish reasons, but, you know, it started off that way, but it became a lot more as the story progressed. So I thought that was a beautiful angle to it. And that whole situation, like when it's like obviously they're being chased after by both sides, and it's like the toys get lost, I immediately thought like, okay, the storyline is going to be they're going to have to rush. They're like, all right, we believe in you again, Jesper, so we're going to have to rush to get the toys all made again. But it's like, oh no, we don't, those are actually fake. I was like, oh, that was an interesting twist, because I was assuming like they were going to have to rush to make all the toys all over again. I thought that's where that situation was going to go. Or maybe like, hey, maybe those toys ended up in a river and it could be recovered or something. But it's like, nope, those are fake toys, because the kids heard about the angry mob, and obviously the kids talked to them, so they were able to prepare ahead of time. So it's like, oh, so Jesper's like, was this all for nothing? Obviously it was that situation, you know, it wasn't necessary, but it proved Jesper's, you know, he didn't know they were fake, so he was trying to protect those gifts wholeheartedly. So that showed you where his heart was with all of this. So I thought that was a beautiful angle to it. And obviously Mr. Ellenbow and Miss Crumb's children both end up together, because Ellenbow's son daughter gets saved by Mrs. Crumb's son. And I even love that whole thing of like, I hope you know that I'm still very proud of you, honey, or whatever, like that being a bit. But Yeah, it was a very, like I said, just a heartwarming, beautiful story. And I like, especially because like when he had when he was at his low point, as any hero is in a story, his dad being there to kind of, his dad being proud of him, seeing like, because he said he explained the whole thing to his dad, and he's like, oh yeah, my dad was actually proud of me. He hugged me, it's like, because he had given up so much. Obviously, he's still thinking, he's like, oh, those silk sheets. Can we change the subject, because it was breaking his heart thinking about the silk sheets again. But I thought that was, interesting. It's actually neat because it's like, well, aside from like Ellenbow and Crom, like they're the only like two villains, and even then they're not like true villainous villains. It's kind of like they're just kind of, I guess you can almost look at them as like the Scrooges of the movie. Maybe that's kind of what they're supposed to represent. But an element I like though is obviously much like the mythology of Santa Claus like ends up spreading. Like obviously like this thing doesn't just stay in this town, it spreads around, so they have to kind of build an operation out. So obviously they spread the whole Christmas situation and make it more and more of a thing. And years go by. I love the whole thing where Jesper like, oh yeah, me and like Alva, she's in love with me, of course. And I'm like, of course. But obviously the years go by. Like that's what I thought was so interesting too, because I was like, okay, we're just gonna end this unhappy. And I was like, oh, there's like 12 minutes or so left of this movie. And then it kind of like, oh, years go by, and obviously we see Klaus get older and older. I was like, are we about to make this sad? I was like, are you about to make this unnecessarily sad? And for him, it's like the wind's blowing. He's like, oh, it's the time to be with his wife again. I also love Jesper getting the mustache. He's like, oh, it's good, right? Alva hates it. But when it's all said and done, like him, disappearing, I was immediately like, my mom was like, okay. So I thought like, oh, Jesper and Alva are going to become the new Mr. and Mrs. Claus. Like they're going to keep up this tradition, kind of adopt his name and continue the tradition. That's what I thought was going to happen. And it's so sad too, because Jesper's like, he'd stop by and he couldn't find his friend. We see an older Margot because it's been like 12 years. And so he's asking everyone, trying to find out if anyone's seen Klaus. And he couldn't find his friend, and that was, it was a little heartbreaking. I was like, oh, don't make it like this. But then he says, I can't explain whatever happened to him, but I know that because he's got the cookies and everything Christmas related up, and he's waiting up, and he hears jingle bells, and it's like, he's like, once a year I get to see my friend. I was like, that's so beautiful, and that's so sweet. So it's like, I like to believe that obviously he got reunited with his wife, and not just him coming back as Santa Claus, but she stays Mrs. Claus, and able to. It's one of those things where it's like, are you overthinking it regardless? Like he became Santa Claus because of those circumstances, but I'd like to believe like she's, whatever her circumstances are, like she's with him obviously always, as Mrs. Claus, and so I think that was just a beautiful story. And like I said, that just surprised me because I wasn't expecting it, because I was thinking like Jesper and Alva were going to pick up the mantle after him, but for it to be like, oh no, like I don't know what happened to him, but I can't really ever explain it, but I know once a year I get to see my friend again. I'm like, oh, especially because of the back and forth that they had. I was always, so good, because especially with the reindeer situation, I was like, oh yeah, that was good cooperation. Yeah, cool, good cooperation. They were trying not to be happy about like, oh, we actually had some good teamwork. So like the back and forth that they have, and even like Jesper making fun of him because like, wait, that's your real laugh? He's like, come on, just like a snicker or a chuckle, come on. I like that. I should also, I guess the only other villain you could say, I just thought about it, is was it Morgan's, the ferryman, just because he's such a douche. And I love that, like, who did they get to voice him? None other than Norm Macdonald. And just because Norm has that like smarminess to him that he adds to the character, especially because he's like, oh yeah, you want a good reception, oh ring that bell, and that started the feud and everything. And it's like he was a dick all the time, and especially when Alva and Jesper got together and he was just like nearby, he was like and even that whole bit where he was explaining, it's like, oh man, I've never seen anyone more depressed leaving here than when they got here. He's like, oh well, no reason to push it, it's not like, hopefully, it's not like that's going to turn into like fester into some like problem and resentment. I was like, that was just like, wow, like I'm butchering it, but I love that bit so much, So I just like, he's just constantly in the background just being like a total douche. honestly, nothing else to really say. You know, obviously these are just kind of my thoughts about the movie in general, both non-spoiler and spoilers. I love to get to know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think about the movie? What are some of your favorite bits from the movie? Let me know. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.